Hello, hello, hello. So today we are giving you another installment of How a Black Man Died of Old Age. And the man of honor is none other than Harry Belafonte. Now, I discovered Harry Belafonte some years ago in the film that he did with Dorothy Dandridge, Carmen Jones from 1954. I had to look that up. I forgot the name of it. So I discovered him. I think that was the first film I saw him acting in. And honestly, I can't say I was all that impressed with his performance. Now, obviously, he is a good looking man. And so his looks can overshadow his talent. So who knows? But over the years, I have seen more of his films. And I must say, he does have a wide range of the type of characters he can play. I saw him in the movies with Sydney, the comedy films with Sidney Poitier. I believe one of them is called Uptown Saturday Night. Let me check on that. Yes. Okay, so that one came out in 1974. And that one, like I said, it's a comedy, but also action and crime in it. And he was quite different in that one from some of his other uh, films. So yeah, okay. Bill Cosby was also in that. I forgot, but and I believe Sidney. Yes, he directed this one. But yeah, so when I saw him in those, I got a different view of what he can do as an actor. But Harry Belafonte, he's a complex man in the sense that I think he was struggling with the work he did on screen and the work he did as a civil rights activist and being a strong supporter of civil rights for all. And during the times that we were dealing with some intense issues as a society, what I did not realize is how involved he was in the political scene. That I was surprised to learn about him. Anyway, so yes, Mr. Harry Belafonte is who we are talking about today. He was born in Harlem on March 1st, 1927, raised by his mother and grandmother in Jamaica. Then he returned to the States as a teenager. At the age of 17, Belafonte dropped out of high school and enlisted in the U.S. Navy and served during World War II. When he returned home, he got a job as a janitor's assistant. As a tip, he was given theater tickets that became his introduction into the art form. Some of his notable works are, as I mentioned earlier, Carmen Jones with Dorothy Dandridge in 1954, Odds Against Tomorrow from 1959, and again previously mentioned Uptown Saturday Night in 1974. Some of his notable musical works are Calypso, which was his third studio album, released in 1956 and is the first long play record album to sell over 1 million copies. And there is Belafonte at Carnegie Hall in 1959. The two-night concert event benefited the New Lincoln School and Wiltwick School, respectively. The live album went gold and peaked at number 3 on the U.S. Billboard charts. And lastly, there is Harry and Lena from 1970. That would be Lena Horne. This one was accompanied by an ABC TV special featuring solo and duet performances from the two stars. Now, when RCA released this album, it was only available by mail order, believe it or not, and was not sold in record stores. Harry Belafonte became an EGOT honoree in 2014 when he received the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award at the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, the 6th Annual Governors Awards. As for his personal life, now there are some salacious details there, but he married his first wife, Marguerite, in 1948. She was an actress and newspaper editor. They had two daughters together before divorcing in 1957. Then he married his second wife, Julie Robinson, that same year. She was a singer, dancer, and activist. They had a son and daughter together and remained married for almost 50 years before they divorced in 2004. His last wife and widow is Pamela Frank, a photographer who Belafonte married in 2008. He passed away on April 25th, 2023, at the age of 96 years old. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Tamika, and whether you stumbled upon Junkie for a story or are here by intention, thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you do, please give it a like at the end and subscribe. And don't forget to click the bell to turn on notifications. That way you won't miss out whenever I release new videos. I don't have a book to reference in this episode. Actually, I take that back. I did read Harry Belafonte, My Song, a memoir by Harry Belafonte. That was the only book I read thus far, and the rest of it was from interviews he gave and articles I found online. I took bits and pieces from different articles and such. So let's get back to Harry Belafonte. Now, Harry Belafonte began filming Island in the Sun in 1956. This film stirred up controversy instantly because it had an interracial relationship and the two embraced on screen. And that was Harry Belafonte with Miss Joan Fontaine. Now, Belafonte had been receiving threats from the Ku Klux Klan, and Joan was not inescapable from the threats herself. Harry and Joan had been in many love scenes together, and this was a time when interracial coupling on screen was still unacceptable and not seen. Remember, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner hadn't premiered in theaters until 1967. So we were about 10 plus years away from embracing that type of relationship. Joan didn't seem fazed by the threatening letters, but she did hand them over to the FBI. The head of 20th Century Fox, Daryl Zanuck, called and all but told Belafonte he was doing the film. Basically. He had no choice. So Belafonte was enjoying the success of his recent album release, Calypso. And knowing the adaptation was based on a book he was familiar with, he felt like the role was tailor-made for him. The trouble started when Zanuck hired Robert Rossen to direct. Rossen was raised by his Russian Jewish parents and inherited their left-wing politics. In 1937, he joined the American Communist Party and was a member for 10 years. The aftermath of World War II saw the ACP recede in popularity. Rossen pleaded the Fifth before the Un-American Activities Committee in 1951. After enduring 2 years of being blacklisted, Rawson gave up 57 names of colleagues who were members of the American Communist Party. He then resumed his director career, and many of the names he offered up spent time in jail, were blacklisted, and scrapped. The checkered history of the director wasn't the only problem with the Island in the Sun film. It also had not just the interracial relationship between Belafonte and Joan Fontaine, but it had a second interracial relationship with Dorothy Dandridge and John Justin. So they were really pushing the envelope, busting it wide open, okay? Daryl Zanuck knew not to push the envelope too far and chose not to have scenes showing the characters kissing or sharing physical touch. To Belafonte, this seemed unrealistic. However, to a naive and racist American audience, it was the maximum allowance for black and whites on screen in a fictional romance. Island in the Sun arrived in theaters in June of 1957. The film received mostly good reviews above the Mason-Dixon line. Contrastly, reviews were incendiary below the line. And I quote, "The Ku Klux Klan staged a propaganda campaign burning Daryl Zanuck in effigy and threatening to torch any theater that showed the film. Exhibitors in several southern cities, Atlanta, Charlotte, Memphis, New Orleans, duly banned the film. Even the government enacted legislation to limit the reach of the film's audience in South Carolina, declaring that any theater in the state that dared to show the film would be fined." So when you think about whatever success the film had, basically racist people prevented it from earning the maximum dollar that it could have. Zanuck, with his business acumen, vowed to sue the KKK for violating federal commerce law by interfering with interstate trade for any damage they caused to theaters for the showing of the film. The KKK cowered conversely. The publicity of their stunt attributed to the success of the film, which was the sixth highest grossing film that year. So that's pretty surprising considering that they were banned and not shown in all theaters. For it to gross enough to reach the sixth highest grossing film of that year, that's shocking. Because that means that obviously white people were going to see it, you know. You can't get the top 10 without white people going to see it because blacks are a minority group, right? So, yeah, that is interesting. Okay, so Harry Belafonte, he goes on to assess actress Joan Fontaine's career, which was not auspicious, but basically he was talking about her career in the aftermath of the film's controversy and box office success. And he implied that Hollywood may have been done with her given her age, but the fact that she still drew audiences to the movies until that point, he believed this was a deliberate act to end Fontaine's career, which happened in a few films later. He ended his assessment by suggesting she may have had an inkling of her inevitable demise and chose to make a stance with this film, Island in the Sun, before saying goodbye to Hollywood. Now, I feel like there's more between the lines with his assessment and his sentiments about Joan Fontaine. I mean, I'm not too sure. I haven't read about the actress, so I don't know her history at all, really. I'm trying to think of if I ever saw her in a film, but I don't know much about her, so I'm not sure what he's referring to, because the film, it sounds like it was a success. I mean, they did get some good reviews. It seemed to do well at the theaters, given the obstacles it had to overcome. But he still implies that Joan Fontaine's career suffered because of it. So, who knows? Now, before I get to Belafonte supporting communist regimes and their leaders, raising questions with not just Black folks, but, other folks, let me tell you about Harry Belafonte's close ties to the civil rights movement and MLK Jr. So, Belafonte was blacklisted in Hollywood for his activism and refusal to perform in the South from 1954 through 1961 in protest of the Jim Crow era systematic racism. He was given the disguised title of being difficult. You know how they label people. Difficult can mean a lot of things. So, a tactic used to prevent actors from getting work. When that did not slow him down, there was a cloud of government interest looming over the king of calypso music for his ties to communism. Belafonte had an agent in 1956. His name was J. Richard Kennedy. His birth name was Samuel Solomonic, maybe? He, at some point, became an informant for the CIA. He passed along info that the singer was a communist. He also warned that, and I'm quoting here, Belafonte dispensed with his services, and if he should die mysteriously, the assassins would be pecking communist agents in the United States, working directly with Harry Belafonte, Stanley D. Levinson, and Martin Luther King. I don't know, but Kennedy does sound a little paranoid. Maybe it was justified. Who knows? Harry Belafonte met civil rights leader Martin Luther King in 1956. Now, King was a rising figure in national politics on the plights of Blacks and the poor in America. He called for the government to take action to make it an even playing field for all citizens of the so-called land of the free. Belafonte had many conversations with MLK Jr. and believed that those conversations were recorded and listened to by the FBI. When MLK Jr. needed financial support for his Project Confrontation, he called his dependable friend Harry Belafonte, who by that time was a multi-selling singer and Hollywood actor. Belafonte had the prominence and the clout to fundraise for the cause. Project Confrontation was a campaign partly organized by MLK Jr. in the spring of 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, to protest and end segregation once and for all. Quite a big task. The nonviolent protests lasted 10 weeks and preceded the Civil Rights Movement, the Voting Rights Act, and MLK Jr.'s martyrdom until his death. MLK was up against the Commissioner of Public Safety, Bull Connor, and the Birmingham police force. He knew participants would be risking their lives for the cause. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which King was the president of, was organizing the protests, but were also flat broke. They needed money to fund the event and delegate the offense to match Bull Connor's response. King asked Belafonte if he would fundraise for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he agreed. Belafonte held the fundraiser at his palatial apartment at 300 West End Avenue in New York City. Some of the guests included actors Ossie Davis and Sidney Poitier. Belafonte attracted prominent figures from the political world as well. He was so devoted to the cause that he gave his own money. The more entrenched the actor became in the civil rights movement, the more removed he was from Hollywood and the business of filmmaking. The deep pockets who attended the fundraiser raised over $475,000 for the cause, which would amount to about $4.5 million in today's dollars. It was Belafonte's close relationship with Martin Luther King Jr. that made the government uneasy. Harry Belafonte may not have been a leader in the fight for justice, but he was a staunch supporter who risked his life and career in support of civil rights. When King was jailed in Alabama, Belafonte put up King's bail and raised $50,000 for the other civil rights activists who were imprisoned to be released. Project Confrontation led to President Kennedy and his brother, then Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, sponsoring the civil rights legislation. Although it took Klan members bombing the motel where King stayed during the protests, King getting arrested, then writing his letter from Birmingham jail, and the mistreatment of the Birmingham Police Department, who used fire hoses and dogs on the nonviolent protesters, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference initial objective had been accomplished. During the years of the 1960s and 70s, there was a decline in Belafonte's presence in Hollywood and on the music scene, which could be the result of his activism and vocal stance on injustice and racism in America. After reading so much about Harry Belafonte and his career and his personal life, I was so surprised at the risk he took because he did have a family to feed. You know, he had children he was raising, he had a wife. And when I read all how involved he was in civil rights and how it affected his career, because there was a time when he was not getting as much work. He could have been selfish and just said, you know, I got to feed my family. I can't be involved in this. And I think that's why, if you pay attention to his career, you see gaps, and his films are not as widely known as his, I guess, contemporaries from that time, you know, like Sidney Poitier and, well, I guess I can't say Bill Cosby because he was more a TV actor, known as a TV actor, I think. So there weren't a lot of well-known Black film actors, or I should say successful ones in that time period. But still, I can see just from what Harry Belafonte did participate in, the films he did do, it's unless it also has to do with his choosing certain roles and declining others. But I think it's probably a combination of the two. He was deliberate about what type of roles he chose, but also I think his involvement in civil rights and the movement hindered his career to some extent. And now I'm going to tell you about the time when Harry Belafonte supported communist regimes and their leaders, raising some questions and eyebrows. So his politics is as complex as his acting resume. It may seem erratic and contradictory, but as we mature and evolve, we become self-inflicted hypocrites, I think, which is what his public persona reflects. In 1950, Wisconsin Senator Joseph R. McCarthy professed to have a list of 205 card-carrying communists employed in the U.S. Department of State. From then on, McCarthy became a passionate crusader opposed to communism in the early 1950s, which was commonly referred to as the Red Scare. You can read more about this on eisenhowerlibrary.org. That's where I read part of this story. In Hollywood, no one could be associated with the Red Scare. It ended careers and lives. In the early 1950s, 300 actors, writers, and others working in the industry were blacklisted in Hollywood and ostracized from the community. One of its major stars, Lucille Ball, escaped exile with the help of her husband, her then husband, Desi Arnaz. During this time, Belafonte was crowned King of Calypso music. That was in 1956 after the release of Calypso, the album. As a popular celebrity, he was accused of being a member of the American Communist Party. He had to testify before the House Committee on Un-American Activities in 1956. Belafonte acknowledged that he made a deliberate decision to use his celebrity persona and music to insert activism. In his lifetime, he has always denied being a communist, but had many affiliations to and certainly ran in communist circles. There was his friendship with communist supporter Paul Robeson, who Belafonte called his mentor. He also called Cuban leader Fidel Castro a close friend. Paul Robeson was a Black activist who pivoted between many professions. He was a singer, actor, football player. He even was a lawyer. He wore many hats. Now, I'm quoting from an article I read on Britannica.com. In 1950, the U.S. State Department withdrew his passport because he refused to sign an affidavit disclaiming membership in the Communist Party. This is Paul Robeson. In the following years, he was virtually ostracized for his political views, although in 1958, the Supreme Court overturned that affidavit ruling. Now, Fidel Castro was the communist leader of Cuba from 1959 until 2008. President Castro transformed his country into the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere. Through his legal acumen and military support, Castro effectively obtained leadership of Cuba with the approval of his fellow Cubans. By 1960, the U.S. had severed most of our economic ties with Cuba because of the disapproval of how President Castro secured leadership and his radical policies that were enacted in those years. Despite the communist associations, Belafonte had influential relationships with these men while still retaining a successful career in entertainment. But in 1956, not only was the government questioning his communist status, he was also beginning to see backlash from Hollywood and consequently getting blacklisted for a period of time. When he appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, even Sullivan himself came to Belafonte's defense, claiming there was no truth to the communist accusations. Belafonte declared, "I too became a victim of the House Un-American Activities Committee and McCarthyism." Because Belafonte supported presidential candidate Henry Wallace in his 1948 campaign, McCarthy and other enthusiasts targeted him and took violent measures to silence him and other supporters. This is what Belafonte said in a 1998 interview with PBS. Though he did not detail those incidents, he said he was severely attacked by vigilante groups and secret societies. These tactics usually saw men cower to the demands of government officials, giving up names of other prominent people to target and substitute. However, Belafonte proudly proclaims that he refused to work with investigators, opting not to have blood on his hands. Then Ed Sullivan gave him a break. He booked Belafonte on his popular CBS program during the time that he was blacklisted. Sullivan met with him personally to inquire about his communist affiliations. Apparently, there was a list that Belafonte's accusers compiled. He claimed he took responsibility for what he did, and he kept it 100 with Ed Sullivan. He made no sacrificial lamb of his friends and mentors. He simply took credit for his actions, and maybe it was his candor that Sullivan found endearing. Nonetheless, Belafonte appeared on the show and made 10 appearances in all. He became known for his interviewing style, the way he led thought provoking conversations with the finesse of a close friend. Belafonte continued making appearances on popular talk shows throughout his career and even hosted The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson for 1 week in 1968 and did interviews with Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. The irony is that both men would be assassinated within months of their appearances on Johnny Carson. Well, that does it for my time with Mr. Harry Belafonte. I believe I told you like 2 years ago I was going to do this, so I'm right on time. But anyway, there you have it. Thank you again for watching and listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find a link in the description for Harry Belafonte, My Song, a memoir by Harry Belafonte. I did read that book and got a lot of insight about his personal relationships throughout his career. And so, yes, I would recommend reading that book if you are interested in learning more about the actor. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thank you again, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.